Hello and welcome to Seminary Reacts, where we ask professors to react to Reddit questions and stories. Today I am joined by Malinda Berry. Welcome to the podcast.
Well, it's great to be here, Amy.
Yeah,
I'm very excited.
I'm so glad that you're here today.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you teach?
Sure. So I'm a member of the teaching faculty here at AMBS, and my title is Professor of Peace Theology, and that's a way of describing kind of the interdisciplinary nature of the classes I teach. So I generally teach theology and ethics with a little practical theology thrown in there, but in practical terms, or what does that mean, you know, if we sort of bring that down to earth, I teach a course called Church and Race. I teach a class called Suffering and Hope. I teach another class called Earth Keeping, which looks at the environmental crisis in theological perspective. And then I also teach two courses that have kind of peace in the title. One of them is Practicing and Embodying Nonviolence, where we work at developing kind of the spirituality of peacemaking and justice seeking. And then the other class is Christian Ethics and Peace Theology, where we learn more about this kind of peace theology tradition that's been an important part of Mennonite theology, especially in the 20th century and into the 21st.
Great,
Yeah.
great. So before we go into our questions here, what's your experience been with Reddit?
Oh, yes, Reddit. Okay. So I first started, of course I heard people talking about Reddit, you know, reporters seeing it on blogs and things like that. And then I remember there was a moment where I did an internet search for something, and like up come AI generated answers along with Reddit threads. And I was like, I visit Reddit once and now I see all these Reddit threads. So, so I have some experience with Reddit. It was, at first I was, you know, kind of holding it at arm's length, but I have found some very useful subreddits around some of my favorite period dramas. I'm a historical drama person. So I enjoy perusing some of those kinds of Reddits. But I don't generally go there for, like if I'm doing research on a topic related to my scholarship, I might go there to see what people are saying about it, but I don't generally go there to get information that I'm looking for unless it's about my favorite television show.
Would you like to share what that is?
Oh, well, okay. I have a variety of favorite television shows. Right now I am watching Slow Horses. Okay, if it's British, if it has spies in it, if it's murder mysteries, cozy, or police procedurals, I'm there. Jane Austen.
Awesome.
Big fan of Bridgerton.
Yeah.
Shonda Rhimes is brilliant.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Oh no, Reddit is such a great place to be getting people's opinions and things. That's one of the main places I'll go. I mean, like there's a lot of like YouTubers I like. And different comedians. And Reddit's always the best place to get people's takes on things.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. That's awesome. So today we are going to be answering some questions. We're going to start off by talking a little bit about Mennonites.
Yes.
And there's been the word Mennonite that's been dropped a couple of times, but a lot of people, especially a lot of people on Reddit, are not super familiar with who Mennonites are and what they believe. So we're going to be diving into that today.
I am ready.
Awesome.
Let's do it.
Awesome. So our first question is coming from the subreddit Mennonite, and the title of this post is, I have a question about what the religion even is. To start off, I'm not a Mennonite, but I do have some questions. I mean all of these genuinely, and I'm not here to argue anyone's beliefs, simply to learn. So I met a Mennonite and have recently seen a few Mennonite churches popping up, but I can't find anything reliable online. When I look it up, I get vague statements about Anabaptism and pacifism, so I'm kind of curious as to what this religion even entails and what it's about. Spare no details, please. And I think with that spare no details, please, this is the right place to be talking about that.
Yeah. Well, so let me start by responding to that with a little bit of kind of my autobiography, and so that people understand kind of how I'm answering the question or why I'm answering in particular ways. So I was born and raised in a Mennonite family and in a Mennonite community. And within all of that, my family has some uniquenesses. So my mother comes from a Mennonite community in eastern Ohio that can trace its roots all the way back to Switzerland, many, many generations, and kind of the Alsace-Lorraine region of Europe. Then my dad became a Mennonite. He grew up in Central Florida in Sarasota, which Sarasota has a lot of Mennonites and Amish, actually. Like there's a neighborhood there called Pinecraft. And so there were people who came down from Lancaster, Pennsylvania to do like mission outreach, church planting. And so they started a little black mission church, and my dad became a member there. The pastors were important mentors to him. And like the Bible school teachers kind of became like second parents to him. And so he ended up going to Eastern Mennonite, then college, now university in Harrisonburg, Virginia. So, and when my dad went to college, he was wearing a plain coat. So this is which will be part of how I answer this bigger question. And then the community that my mother grew up in, while like my mother would have still been wearing a prayer covering like to church, and I remember my grandmother wore a covering on Sundays. That particular congregation had been kicked out of the Ohio Conference when they hired a minister whose wife wore a wedding ring, and he, the minister, wore a suit that had lapels on the jacket, right? That is, he didn't wear a plain coat. And so they got kicked out of Ohio Conference, so they joined Central District, which was fine with all that. And then eventually that congregation rejoined or was invited back into Ohio Conference, and so they had this dual affiliation. So I was shaped and understood Mennonites to be like a range of things. My dad talks about the different stripes of Mennonites, or different flavors. And because my parents were also then affiliated with Mennonite educational institutions, namely Goshen College, a lot of my understanding and assumptions about what it means to be Mennonite were kind of shaped by the intellectual life of Mennonites that became especially important kind of mid-20th century, coming out of World War II. So what is the religion? Well, so Mennonites are a type of Christian. We're part of the Anabaptist movement that, has its roots in the 16th century Protestant Reformation. We sometimes talk about Mennonites as representing the radical wing of the Protestant Reformation. And the big thing that Anabaptists really cared about as they were emerging at that time was, and then became a really important idea in the 20th century as Mennonite scholarship was really taking shape, is that the Anabaptists had a really big problem with the way the church and the state were overlapping. So one of the ways we talk about this is, we talk about something called the Constantinian shift. And I went to Mennonite high school, and I remember learning, we didn't call it the Constantinian shift then, but we learned about Constantine, and we learned that this was a really decisive moment in church history when the Roman emperor has a vision, and he interprets it to say that he's supposed to march into battle under this banner that has the Chi Rho on it, which are two Greek letters that represent Jesus Christ. And in this name conquers is kind of what, this is Constantine on the Milvian Bridge or whatever. And so this is the decisive moment, because when he wins, he comes back from battle and he says, okay, the official religion of the Roman Empire is now going to be Christianity. And it's at that point that when Christianity, which had been this minoritized, marginalized religion, becomes the official religion of the empire, under Constantine, the religion shifts from being this kind of critical thing that's separate, recognizing there are two kingdoms. There's the kingdom of God, and then there are the kingdoms of the world, and that Christianity is always meant to be critiquing this or sort of be apart from this. Now it's the same thing. That was disaster moment.
Yeah, that's a huge shift. It's
a huge shift, and this is when it all went downhill. So that what the reformers were trying to do, what the people like the Anabaptists were trying to do, and they were like, it's not like the Anabaptists were original in this. They're sort of picking up on this, on people who were dissenting from this shift. And so the Anabaptists kind of galvanized into a movement, and their way of making their voice heard was through this act of what becomes civil disobedience by kind of disavowing their baptism. Because what's happened in the Constantinian shift over time is that when a baby is born, you take them to the local church to have them baptized, and that's how they become sort of recognized as citizens, right? So you're a citizen of this of the empire, and you're a citizen of the church. Well, so again, this is what I learned at home, at church, and in school. These 16th century rabble rousers said, you know what? We want to be baptized again, because we kind of renounce that baptism that was done on our behalf as children, as infants, and we now choose this baptism. And they viewed Jesus as their kind of prototype for this, because we have this story of Jesus finding John the Baptist and asking him for baptism, and the heavens opening, and the Spirit of God descending like a dove and saying, this is my son, my beloved, the one with whom I'm well pleased. And that's the theological, biblical, spiritual framing of baptism. And we do this as adults, making this choice rather than having it being done on our behalf. And it signals not our citizenship of the municipality into which we've been born, but our allegiance to God and our participation in God's reign, right? So that's where the name Anabaptist comes from, like rebaptizers, because that's the other thing. People are like, helpful. Anti-Baptist. No, it's not anti-Baptist. And oftentimes, when I meet people who are Baptists, they're like, yeah, see, that's our story too, right? So Anabaptist, Baptist, that all comes from a similar kind of root. So then Mennonites are a particular branch of that movement that named themselves after Menno Simons, who was a leader in the Netherlands, or he was Dutch. And there are lots of different branches of Mennonites. But when people ask me, we aren't a separate religion. We are a minority group, a subculture, a religious subculture within Christianity. That is my answer to that.
Yeah, that's great. Can you say a little bit, I know this person kind of brought up pacifism as relating to that a little bit.
Okay, so this one is a little more kind of controversial, I'll put it that way. So again, growing up in this milieu, I was taught that being Mennonite meant being pacifist, or saying we don't fight, we don't use violence, we don't believe in these things as ways of solving problems. We think that violence and killing go against what God wants for the world. Now, it's also tempting to be taught. Well, okay, I was also taught that goes all the way back to the 16th century, but it's more complicated than that. And this kind of contemporary or modern commitment to social justice that a lot of Mennonites are known for is something that really evolved over the centuries. And where I would say it grew out of is, again, if we go, because we love going back to the 16th century, right? Like that's the golden age. And so that happens a lot here at seminary, where we kind of bounce back and forth between the 21st century and the 16th century.
And it's like the 500th year too. That's been a huge thing.
So that's also
anniversary.
like, whoop, whoop.
Yeah.
So when we go back to the 16th century, there are all of these different pockets of Anabaptist activity, and that then sort of get knit together into a kind of network. And when you study that history, you see that there are these different kind of continua, or like we might even call them kind of polarities, where let's take, for example, reading and interpreting Scripture. There were some Anabaptists who really believed in interpreting Scripture to the letter, and others who said, we aren't going to be legalistic about this. What we're trying to do is gain a sense of the spirit of these letters from Paul, let's say, like what are these instructions telling us to do? So that was that's one of these polarities where you saw different Anabaptists moving in different directions on that continuum. Another one was the use of the sword. Some Anabaptists believed that they needed to be willing to, that because of like this Constantinian shift, any religious conflict is also a political conflict. And so some Anabaptists believe you need to be willing to pick up the sword to fight for this, what do I want to say, frame of doing community. Others said, absolutely not. We're trying to follow Jesus. Jesus tells Peter to put away his sword instead of fighting back as he goes to his death and by crucifixion. Jesus does that, or let me say that again. Jesus tells Peter to put away his sword, and when faced with death and crucifixion, rather than calling up an armed revolt, Jesus walks to his death. So we take those, so other Anabaptists said, we take those as our norms, so we refuse to pick up the sword. So that becomes kind of the prototype for, or the touchstone for, contemporary pacifists. But it, again, like I said, it's important to understand that was not a settled question at the beginning of Anabaptism. And it's been an evolution because even once you get into the 20th century, there are some people who believe very strongly in what we call biblical non-resistance, where they're taking the words of Jesus, resist not an evildoer, to say, you know what, like if somebody hits us, we aren't even supposed to defend ourselves. We are supposed to be defenseless. Again, they're, looking at Jesus and the way he walks to his death on the cross.
Right.
So biblical non-resistance, not pacifism, right? Because pacifism was a more worldly kind of philosophy or ideology that believed, we could get rid of war. And there would have been Anabaptists who were like, war is a sign of evil and it's part of the presence of the powers and principalities. So like, it's not going anywhere. We can't get rid of it. What we can do is faithfully, using the Bible as our set of reference points, we can resist it. The language of biblical non-resistance can sometimes be a little bit confusing because they're resisting by not being violent. So it's called non-resistance, that is, resist not an evildoer. And what that means is you just don't fight for yourself. So it's a form of resistance that is committed to not using weapons or other forms of self-defense or force to stand against evil.
Yeah, yeah. So we kind of look at Mennonites and we see this non-resistance as a big part of it. Are there any other characteristics about the Mennonite church that you, I mean, we've kind of said that there's not really a good one size fits all definition for Mennonite churches. But are there any other characteristics that you think represent the Mennonite world a little bit?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is where the differences, like some of the ethnic dynamics, are probably important to mention. So I talked about how my mother comes from the kind of Swiss German line of Mennonites. So you have these different communities and groups in Europe, and they immigrate to North and South America at different times. And they end up landing in different physical places. And because they were doing like these waves of migration were happening at different times, some of the communities have been in the United States, for example, a lot longer. So like the Swiss Mennonites who ended up in Pennsylvania and then moved into Ohio and down into Virginia, like they've been here a long time, like generations and generations. When some of the Mennonites, like in Kansas, or in like the prairie provinces in Canada, were later migrations, and so they were actually still speaking German, or might and still have some German-speaking congregations and worship services. So these Swiss Germans who ended up in the U.S. in the colonial period, among them, there rises up this teaching around nonconformity, which comes out of Romans chapter 2. Be ye not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your minds. And nonconformity became this really important teaching. Some would even say doctrine. And when I say doctrine, I mean that in a kind of pejorative way. Like it becomes very wooden and very kind of top-down teaching that everybody is expected to, interestingly enough, conform to our doctrine of nonconformity. But what you're seeing is this concern that people not become too worldly. And so nonconformity in dress became one of the obvious things. I mentioned these prayer coverings and the plain coats. So these things are all based on biblical teachings, like a woman should keep her head covered. That's coming out of the Corinthian correspondence. And one of the reasons given for wearing jackets that didn't have lapels on them is because the military coats of soldiers often had very fancy lapels, and so this is again part of this evolution of the biblical non-resistance and what then becomes the pacifism. But nonconformity also related to business practices, and Mennonites are known historically for not having unions in their businesses that they started because of this doctrine of nonconformity. The idea was you should treat your employees well enough that they don't need to unionize. And that there was also this sense that unions, that kind of collective bargaining, was an expression of power politics and kind of coercive control. So again, if you aren't treating your workers fairly and they need to organize to get you to do what you should be doing if you follow Jesus' teaching about economics, then something's gone awry here. So there was this prohibition against joining unions and forming unions and supporting unionization, so that's again a little bit kind of complicated. Another expression of nonconformity was not buying insurance. Because insurance was viewed as a form of gambling.
Oh, wow.
right?
Yeah, I didn't know about that.
And so instead, Mennonites, Anabaptists practiced mutual aid. And we see this like in the Bruderhof, or the Hutterite communities, where they hold, like they're trying to live out this vision in Acts of the early church, where they hold all things in common. And like Everence, which is connected to Mennonite Church USA, used to be Mennonite Mutual Aid. And it sold insurance, but it was also this kind of fraternal organization, which was popular among different kind of civic and denominational groups, to have this federation of church bodies that would pool their resources to share them with other members of the church. So nonconformity, again, especially among like the Swiss German descended Mennonites and Anabaptists, was a really big deal. And for some people it meant, like during the Vietnam War, people became non-registrants with the Selective Service. So again, they're sort of taking the prototype of the 16th century folks who kind of renounced their baptism and that civil disobedience. This is how we can enact that value in our time and place, by saying, you know what, our allegiance is to God's reign and God's kingdom, and so we are not going to be sent by our government half a world away to kill another one of God's beloved children. So nonconformity, I think, is another. I like talking about that one, because I think it's so fascinating.
And I think it's really fascinating to talk about the way that Mennonites do it specifically, because like right now, there's a lot of discourse about whether or not Christians should be celebrating Halloween. I think like when we see this idea of nonconformity, a lot of people will say, will associate it with something like that. But there is this radical and amazing feature of nonconformity that we're seeing here that is really kind of, standing up to the systems that exist. And
that's right.
And the definition of how are we being separate from the world. It's very, very powerful. Not to say that people who, the other sorts of nonconformity in following the convictions that they have, that's great too. But there's this communal and just powerful aspect of nonconformity that we're seeing from Mennonites.
And another thing I'll say about nonconformity and along these lines is it was very interesting to me. So I've also been a kind of a student of the civil rights movement, or what Vincent Harding calls the Southern Freedom Movement in the United States. And Martin Luther King Jr. gave us a sermon, or preached a sermon on this passage from Romans about nonconformity. And it's really interesting to me to see, kind of compare how the civil rights movement used that wisdom around nonconformity compared to Mennonites. And in King's sermon, he talks about being a thermometer and being a thermostat. And so he describes kind of conformist Christians as thermometers who just read the temperature. But if you want to be a non-conforming Christian, you want to be a thermostat and you change the temperature. Right? Yeah. And so that to me felt like a kind of synergy between what I was taught nonconformity was about, compared to like that other description you offered, like people who still feel called to critique the kind of spirituality and traditions of what we might call the Constantinian Church, right? Although it could also be, maybe this will be a good example of how to kind of bring the two together. Because another important source of nonconformity that shaped my life more directly, because by the time my parents got married and my siblings and I came along, my mother wasn't wearing the covering and my dad wasn't wearing the plain coat anymore. So those sort of visible markers of nonconformity, and my mother cut her hair, right? Because that was another part of this that that women weren't supposed to cut off their glory, was the More with Less cookbook. That was a kind of Mennonite expression of the ecological movement. Like if you're familiar with Diet for a Small Planet by Frances Moore Lappé. And there was all this sort of ecological ferment with the fuel crisis of the 1970s. And Mennonite Central Committee, in the face of the world hunger crisis, said, hey, let's be in solidarity with the world's poor. And so folks in the US and Canada, we want you to shrink your grocery budgets by 10%. And people were like, well, how are we supposed to do that? So they asked Doris Jansen Longacre to put together a cookbook as a resource guide for helping people to do this. And so living more with less became an expression of nonconformity. This time, kind of this, like we're trying to live out our faith by rejecting the rampant consumerism that seems to be everywhere and trying to figure out how to create and use our leisure time to do more meaningful things. So like Halloween has become very consumeristic, right?
Right.
And so there are parts of that I really reject. But one of the things that I've worked to kind of reclaim in Halloween is how, at least for those of us in the Northern Hemisphere, this, like autumn, the season of autumn is archetypally like, you know, the fields, the harvest is pulled in, the flowers are dying. We're thinking about what to do with this kind of storehouse of goods. And it's also typically been a season of, you know, the Archangel Michael, who has this, who's all about justice. And so from our excess, we need to make sure that all the needs of our community are met. And then, so that's like the harvest festivals represent all of that. And then you move from the harvest festivals into All Hallows Tide. And that's when you remember those who have died and have become part of the cloud of witnesses. So we, because now we don't have to run around out working and laboring in the fields, we can, and the daylight shifts, so we can sit by the fire and we can contemplate our mortality. We can think about the legacy that we want to pass on to the next generation and what we've received from the generations that have gone before. And so the reason why people run around in costumes is because as the veil between the spiritual realm and the material world thin, you want to trick death and make sure that death doesn't come for you before it's time.
Right.
And that's the Grim Reaper, right? So you wear costumes so that death can't recognize you. So it's kind of like Harry Potter, if any Harry Potter fans out there. So in my rejection of the consumerism of Halloween, I've found this like much richer, deeper meaning of what's going on. And I see these values that I want to incorporate into how we do Halloween at my house. So you know, I talk with my kids about this kind of stuff. Now we happen to live on Trick or Treat Alley in Goshen. So I've learned the hard way. If you want to be a good neighbor, you got to buy hundreds of pieces of candy.
Yeah.
But within that, you know, we again try to figure out how can we encourage people to pay attention to what the season means too. So
yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. So another question we have about Mennonites here comes from the subreddit No Stupid Questions.
Okay.
And the question here is, what are the differences between Amish and Mennonites?
Yeah.
Because I see a lot of people with the conception that they're the same. And I mean, I'm sure like it's also related to this idea that there's many different strands of Mennonites.
Yeah.
But what are the differences between Amish and Mennonites traditionally?
So this is a great question, and it actually took me back to a research project that I did in 6th grade. So I got to dust off some of my
Nice.
deeply embedded
Nice.
knowledge here. So, the Amish and Mennonites are related. It starts kind of geographically. So you had this group of Anabaptists in the Swiss Alsace-Lorraine region of Europe. So this, like, if you can picture a map in your mind, we're here in like eastern France, on the borders of what is now Germany and Switzerland. Okay, and that's actually where there's still a sizable Mennonite community in France there today. So there was a sizable Anabaptist community there, and I want to say it was like the 1600s. I think it was like in the 1630s, in fact, there was a schism where that community got into a disagreement. I don't quite remember what it was about. They got into a disagreement about something, and a man named Jacob Amen was the leader of the group that broke away. And so the name Amish comes from Amen. And then so the groups broke apart in Europe, and then members of both groups end up in North America, specifically in the U.S., like, again, going back to Pennsylvania. And a lot of Anabaptists were drawn to Pennsylvania because of William Penn's, because of the Quaker relationship there. This is we sometimes talk about the historic peace churches, the Brethren, the Quakers, and the Mennonites. So the Amish have subdivided, like they've had their own kind of ongoing breaks. So you have New Order Amish and Old Order Amish, and then you had Amish Mennonites. Now, this is where it gets a little bit more complicated. So today there are a range of, we call them plain groups. So plain groups are folks who still practice nonconformity in dress. And so that typically involves a woman wearing some kind of covering on her head. She doesn't cut her hair, so her hair's worn up in a bun or braids underneath her covering. And women are in dresses. Often the dresses are homemade or made by hand. Not always, but mostly. And then Amish men are also known, by their dress. They wear a plain beard, no mustache, and their kind of the thinking was, or at least the account that's often given, is that the mustache was a sign of being in the military. So that, again, is this kind of nonconformist, biblical non-resistance thing. And then, so the Amish are known for their kind of antiquated dress. Let's just simplify it that way. And part of that is because some of what they did was, when they broke away from the Mennonites, or from that larger Anabaptist movement or group, they sort of, they did not want to kind of adapt and accommodate as quickly as they saw other people doing. And so they've kind of preserved this older style of dress, because if you go back, if we got into a time machine with Doctor Who, and went to 16th century Europe, we would see most women had their head covered, right? And nobody is using Corinthians to explain why this is so. Like it was just part of.
Right.
I mean, there were probably practical reasons, as well as maybe any theological reasons. So the Amish just kind of preserved their ways. Like that's so one way to think about the difference between Mennonites and Amish is that Mennonites tend to be change-minded or change-oriented.
Okay.
But then what we also start to see is, you've got, like I said, these plain groups. So like conservative Mennonites or the beachy Amish or Amish Mennonites, who are this kind of hybrid between change-minded Mennonites and the Amish. So I have in-laws. My husband grew up in a beachy Amish community, and I have in-laws who still live as plain Mennonites. So I have sisters-in-law who wear prayer coverings and dresses and don't cut their hair. But they have cars, they have electricity, they have cell phones, they listen to the radio. There aren't any TVs, but there are computers around, and all kinds of modern machinery to help with the farming. So that's very, but the Amish tend to, again, keep that stuff at arm's length. Or there are cell phones and solar panels and things like that on Amish farms, and even businesses that utilize this stuff, as long as it's not in the house.
Yeah.
Right? Because the idea is that you're trying to maintain a sort of simplicity and live your life in a way that keeps this vision of the peaceful kingdom at the center. And and you do that by living your life in markedly different ways. Now, let's also take off the gloves here, because the fact of the matter is that line between the Amish and Mennonites it moves. It's not static, and it's not drawn in one place. Maybe another helpful piece of context is that that describes the relationship between the Amish and the Mennonites is that around here in Elkhart County, there were a number of churches that were set up, kind of church plants, that were places where people who were leaving the Amish church could land and stay kind of in the Anabaptist family. Because in the 20th century, especially, you would always have a group of Amish who wanted more education, because the Amish sort of cap education at the eighth grade level, or longed for a different expression of spirituality, like maybe livelier singing in Sunday school. And so people would either leave the Amish church or become excommunicated from the Amish church. And so those folks would often end up joining these conservative Mennonite groups or the plain Mennonite groups. And then it wasn't uncommon for many of those families to kind of make the progression to what they call liberal Mennonites. So like Mennonite Church USA.
Right.
What's been interesting, like there are a number of Mennonite sociologists who study the Amish. And one of the things they've discovered is that as time has gone on and you've had generational changeover among the Amish bishops, they've been more capacious, like they're a little more open-minded, and have relaxed some of the rules that earlier generations of bishops were really, really strict about. So what that has meant is the folks who would leave the Amish church for theological reasons and become Mennonite, the Amish are retaining them. Okay, so the Amish church is growing.
Yeah.
Now there has always been a certain percentage of Amish or young people who don't join the Amish church or leave the Amish church and become, they call anybody who's not Amish English, and become English, but they tend to integrate into more kind of white working class Midwestern culture. They leave the Amish church because it just isn't how they want to live, and so that group will, it continues to leave, but we aren't seeing people becoming Mennonites. Which
interesting.
Which is, I think, very interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
So to come back around to the original question, what's the relationship between Amish and Mennonites? Well, there's this historical relationship. The Amish broke away from the Mennonites, not the other way around, because we tend to assume it was the other way because we see the Amish as being so stuck in the past, and Mennonites as kind of assimilationists, kind of moving away from those earlier origins to being more mainstream. But it was actually the other way around. And now today, I would say, while there are some places where there is quite a bit of crossover or interwoven community life, like where we're located, there's not a lot of interaction between people in Mennonite Church USA and Amish churches, unless you are, unless you run a business and you've got a lot of Amish employees in your RV factory, or you're remodeling your kitchen. My parents had an Amish cabinet maker when they remodeled their kitchen. But then and then we could talk about how we're like kitchens that are all marble. I mean, there's a lot of wealth among Amish too. That would be the other thing for people to know. There's a lot of simplicity there in how people live, but there's also an incredible amount of wealth.
Yeah. Okay. Great explanation.
Yeah.
We're going to go on to our next question. And this is coming again from the subreddit Mennonite. And this user, the title of the post is, as a Mennonite convert, I need some elders to help me. And the user quotes Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, who is delivering remarks to generals and admirals. And the quote is, "As history teaches us, the only people who actually deserve peace are those who are willing to wage war to defend it. That's why pacifism is so naive and dangerous." And so my assumption here is that this, the person who's making this post is troubled by this. For one reason, because it's being spoken in front of people who are major figureheads of the United States, and also just this idea that pacifism is being described as naive and dangerous.
Yeah, especially when at this point in time, pacifism, a commitment to nonviolence, is so central to Mennonite identity as a Christian movement now.
Yeah.
Okay, so as you were reading that quote, like my eyes are getting smaller and I'm getting a little more ugh. So I definitely feel activated. Emotionally activated hearing that quotation. It's not surprising. And I will also kind of label it regressive. So let me unpack that a little bit more. And we're filming this podcast here at Anabaptist Mennonite Biblical Seminary, and part of the kind of intellectual legacy or heritage, or isness as I like to call it, of AMBS is that generations of the faculty here have really coalesced around this kind of scholarly project of making a Christian commitment to nonviolence and pacifism intellectually respectable. Okay, so that is working to create a defense, no pun intended, to comments like Pete Hegseth's. So it's a long-standing and very old criticism. So let's start there. So there's nothing new. The other thing I would say is that this quote goes to the heart of the Constantinian shift and the problem that the critique that Mennonites have of the Constantinian shift. Because scholars will agree, historical scholars agree that before this Constantinian shift, the Christian church, the Christian movement was what we call today pacifist. I mean, that's not a term that they were using in the first several centuries of the church, but it's a term that we can legitimately apply looking back. And the other thing that's going on with Pete Hegseth's analysis there is that he's clearly buying into, again, the Constantinian or the kind of Christendom perspective that the way, well, okay, so if we go back to the Roman Empire, Imperial Rome talked about something called the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. And that's the peace that's achieved through war, by conquering others and subduing your enemy. Now, what we need to also keep in mind is that this is a very hierarchical way of thinking about the world. So I'm an advocate and a fan of a particular form of circle process called the Circle Way, and my teachers in that talk about how there are two archetypes of group process among humans. There's the circle, which is this kind of egalitarian, democratic, everybody's got a voice approach to process. And then there's triangle, which is a hierarchical, kind of top-down process. Now, my teachers, Anne Linnea and Christina Baldwin, argue that human communities are at their best when we can keep circle and triangle together. So what does this look like? Well, it means that whenever people gather, you need leaders. And it's good if rather than having one leader, you have multiple leaders. It's like a team of 3 leaders that kind of create points of a triangle in the circle. And that so leadership is shared, in other words, and that leadership needs to rotate. Because if the same people stay in charge, what good is that? That's why we have term limits in this country. Okay, let's not to put too fine a point on it here. So we need to remember that, like, the Roman Empire was a hierarchy. The emperor's at the top, and then you had clear stratification of society. And so when you're in this hierarchical frame of mind, you exercise, like, it's domination culture. You exercise power over others. I'm getting this, I'm not, like, this is Walter Wink, right? The biblical scholar of blessed memory. And so when Christianity merges with the domination system, you get this belief that it is a Christian's duty when they're working in government to use the mechanisms, the hardware of government to suppress dissent and for people to fall in line, and that's what makes for peace. Okay? Now, the other thing that's interesting, well, okay, so my dad was a political scientist. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier. So I was taught to be kind of attentive to how power moves around and how we talk about it, and what kind of system is shaping how people are interacting and resources are being used and shared. So when we talk about, like, right-wing politics, one way to think about, or if you have the political spectrum, so you have things on the left and things on the right, one way to understand left and right is to go back to the circle and triangle business. When you are practicing politics on the right, you are more apt to practice triangle. So when your politics land on the right, you're more apt to view reality through the lens of the triangle. We need strong leaders at the top, and good citizens are those who submit to the discipline of the people at the top. That's how you keep peace. The other thing that goes along with that, though, is a view of government not as the thing that helps a society to flourish by making sure everyone's needs are met. That's circle, and that's what people on the left end of the spectrum tend to favor. In triangle world, the role of government is to manage the inequalities that naturally arise when you have a diverse or pluralistic society. So if you've got differences in race, ethnicity, religion, wealth, you aren't trying to figure out how to give everybody a place at the table. Again, that's the circle.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's got a voice. Everybody has a place. We keep widening the circle. In triangle world, government exists to make sure that those folks know their place. And you manage the conflict that's going to be created by wealth inequality or racial competition or cultural competition. And I mean, I could keep going on about that, but my blood pressure is starting to rise, so I'm going to shift over here to talk about life on the left, which I've already kind of alluded to, right? Mm-hmm. It's circle land. And so everybody, like, we tolerate everybody, we seek to accept everybody, everybody has a voice, but how easy is it to get decisions made over here?
It's not very easy.
Right? Listen, I love Ezra Klein, but Ezra Klein is not happy with Democrats. Mm. And it's because there's too much circle. So bipartisan, to have a truly bipartisan functional society, you need to have triangle and circle working together. Mm-hmm. So that's a little bit of political philosophy. What was the question?
Yeah, I can read the quote again if that's helpful.
Oh, it's Pete Hegseth is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay. So part of what the issue that I have right now with the way the government is running is that you have people like Pete Hegseth, who is a particular kind, who is a right-wing Christian. I mean, I'm using right-wing not to disparage him, but to describe his mm-hmm. beliefs. I'm trying to respect and show respect to his belief system. He believes in
this
triangle land.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And he believes that it is the job of the US government to be an agent of God's reign through theocracy. That is not democracy, and mm-hmm. it's not pluralism. So hopefully you can tell by my tone of voice and the look on my face, I think he's the one who's naive.
Yeah.
And I think he's the one who's dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you oppress people, there will be a rebellion.
Right.
And
right.
I mean, if we go to, I believe in metaphysics. What does metaphysics mean? It means that there are forces that shape reality in the world that can't be seen. So, for example, like, I believe that God created the foundations, like the foundations of the universe are love, like that holds everything together. And so you can push against those moral foundations of the universe all you want. At some point, the universe will break you, is the way. So I mean, not out of malevolence, but it's physics. It's right. A metaphysics. Mm-hmm. Like love will overcome hate. So that's part of my faith. I can't always point to it, but it's one of the reasons why, for as much as I get angry about Pete Hegseth and the things that he says and the way he's flexing power, mm-hmm. I also try to calm myself down, resting in assurance. Well, and reminding myself, listen, everybody's trying the best they can, doing what they're doing in the way they're doing it, and it's not always awesome. So this isn't awesome.
Right.
Right. And I consider what's happened in Pete Hegseth's life that makes him desire to have this much control Well, he hasn't been nice to people in his life, and he has struggled with addiction, and there's a lot he's trying to overcome. So look what happens when people think that the solution to their problems and their challenges is power over.
Yeah.
Bad things. But power with, that is shared power, is God's way and is resilient and will come through. So that's my answer.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Okay, Pete's comment, Secretary Hegseth's comment, is coming from a place that's deep in him. It's coming from a well of fear that is also old, ancient, and has been around. And what shall we say? There is no Roman Empire anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. I hadn't thought about the Roman Empire and that connection there, because I know, like, I'd heard about this idea that in the Roman government they were using war as a way to create peace.
Yep.
Theoretically, but I hadn't connected that to this quote as many times as I've seen it and read it. But I think that's really interesting. Just the way that's exactly what that is.
Exactly what it is.
It's using violence to create some sort of pseudo peace.
Yep.
Yeah.
And telling people who view the world through the lens of peace as nonviolence, that they are childish. I mean, like, he's clearly diminishing.
Right.
Diminishing
Naive.
that kind of
Directly calling it
worldview.
naive.
And why would he need to attack it so viciously if he didn't fear it?
That's true. Yeah. Those are good thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah.
So to finish up here, I have this one last post that is coming from the subreddit Christianity, just to end things on a little bit of a lighter note.
Okay.
Something I saw on Reddit that gave me a little bit of hope today.
Oh, good.
So somebody posted, for people in areas losing SNAP benefits, what are you and your church doing to help? So this post, this is coming out at the time when we're thinking about the potential of losing SNAP benefits, which is obviously causing a lot of stress for people.
Yeah.
And so this poster is really asking, so what are people doing? And later in the post, the person says, I'm curious to what everyone else is doing. Personally, so far, I've just donated more money than I usually do to my church's food pantry, looking for ideas on other or most effective ways to help. In addition to food pantries not having enough, I'm also worried about people who need specialized diets. I'm not sure if food pantries can accommodate them normally or how to best help those groups. But I wanted to read a couple of the comments that I saw. There were a lot on this post that were describing the ways that their churches and communities were really rallying and saying, we're gonna respond to this issue. But I just want to read a couple of them.
Yeah, please.
So the first comment was, my church is always asking for members to donate food and canned goods. It used to be seasonal, but since COVID, it's been a year-round program. Another comment says, we have a food bank on site and we fully stocked it. In addition, we sent a ton of food to a downtown parish, which also has a food bank and soup kitchen, since some poor can't drive out to us. We had a special offertory for this for the past few weeks. We are also paying for some people's electric and water bills right now, in addition to our normal charity work. So this commenter, like, their church is doing a whole lot. And this last person says, I currently haven't been to church in a few weeks based on several family issues. However, I have donated to Feeding America. For those who don't have a church home or their church may not be donating food to food pantries at this time, please find other means to donate. Whoever is reading this, thank you for being God's light in the world. So I think in all this conversation about, looking at Pete Hegseth's quote, but also just in a time in the world where it's easy to have a lot of hopelessness about what's happening, it's good to see that there are people that are rallying together and responding in some way.
Right.
It's just good to see Christians actually being the hands and feet of Christ.
Yeah. Well, and feeding the hungry, right?
Yes.
So I also am encouraged by that. And a couple of things that I would highlight. So one of my kind of community involvements is that I'm on the board of Maple City Market, which is a cooperative grocery store over in Goshen. And it's been around now for 50 years, which is very exciting. My parents were early members of the co-op, and that started off as just a buying club, with people getting 50-pound bags of oats and then dividing it up, and it was a cheaper way of buying groceries. It also was a way of people having kind of direct control over their food. And another thing I would say about cooperative grocery stores is that, like, for me, growing up with in a household that was a member of this cooperative grocery store, this was a really tangible way to practice community. But what also became really important, so my mom did a lot with peace education, both in our church and in our home, kind of coming back around to this evolution of Mennonites' commitment to peacemaking. And I was taught that cooperation comes before competition. And so as I've been, I've been a shopper at Maple City Market for a long time, but having been on the board now since 2020, that's given me an opportunity to really dig into those beliefs and how they can connect in the civic space. And we just had a board retreat, and one of the things that our consultant was talking with us about is how things are gonna keep getting worse for people.
Right.
We're filming this podcast in the context of the government shutdown, and it's not clear how that's going to resolve. The SNAP benefits coming to an end are also it's another kind of crisis breaking point. So one of the principles of co-ops is that cooperatives help each other. So it's not just about like the board looking out for Maple City Market. We also are interested in how the Purple Porch Co-op over in South Bend is doing, and you have co-ops coming together to increase their buying power. And we have this national organization of cooperative grocery stores, and they have some like all the co-ops have to pay in certain amounts so that in case there's a month that goes by that we can't pay some of our bills, there's a slush fund for us to dig into. Well, so this national organization has decided, or is in the process of rolling out the news that they're going to take that slush fund and disperse it among the cooperative grocery stores so that they can help keep foods affordable for families that relied on, like shoppers who've relied on SNAP benefits. So that's like a big structural thing.
Right. Yeah.
That I think it can be really powerful. So cooperative grocery stores would be one. Like in addition to giving money to different organizations and supporting your local church's efforts, I would say look for the co-ops that you can support. Credit unions are another expression of co-ops if people are feeling yucky about the banking in the institutions of banking.
Right.
But then I also was in a meeting earlier this week, and was talking with some of the other people in the meeting, included some Mennonite pastors. And one of the pastors was describing all of the different ways that their congregation is committed to working together across political differences. Like they talk openly and acknowledge their political differences on a range of things, whether it's it's Palestine or what candidates to support, but they can all agree to stock the community fridge.
Right.
And they can all agree that they don't want neighbors to go hungry. And so I think in addition to finding these, again, tangible ways to give and share, like I want to encourage people to also just sort of pause and savor the power of cooperation in community.
And it feels like it's happened so quickly.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
with the announcement, okay, this is probably going to be shut down. The way that I saw people immediately going forward. I mean, the church that I attend when I'm at home in Columbus, I mean, they posted something saying, if you need help, like, please, like, let us know. And seeing how quickly people are like, okay, we are addressing this has been really amazing.
Well,
really
and
amazing.
I think the other thing that this crisis, I mean, I was in a conflict workshop once where someone said that the Chinese character for conflict means crisis and opportunity. I mean, I think that's a myth. It's probably been debunked on Snopes.com, but it's an interesting little idea. And so what are we seeing in this crisis around SNAP benefits? What are we seeing in this crisis around the government shutdown? And now, federal workers have now gone a full cycle without their paychecks, and like, this is crossing class boundaries, right? Everybody needs to eat.
Right. Yep.
And we're seeing that this isn't just some of the government policies aren't just attacking the poor. It's attacking people who want a little more circle in the world.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And so, like, may the circle be unbroken.
Yeah, that's a good word to end on there. We also have I feel like we have these call to actions for the people listening to find your nearest cooperative grocery store, to, encourage your church to be involved in this work, to be donating to food pantries and these different groups that are trying to help people.
And claim that conviction that we have as Christians that, it's the feeding of the 5,000.
Yep.
Right. Look what can happen when we share and we speak up for unmet needs.
That'd be a good sermon.
Yeah.
That'd be a good sermon talking about the feeding the 5,000 and everything that's happening.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining me today.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed talking about Mennonites, responding to some of these questions.
I did. They were great questions.
Yeah.
They were great questions.
And thank you for listening to Seminary Reacts. Please leave us a like, a positive review, and comment any questions or stories for us to react to. Also comment anything that your community might be doing to help during this time. You can find Seminary Reacts on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. See you next time. Bye.